10-year retirement is sold on YouTube as a motivation problem. The math says it's a savings rate problem, and the gap between the two versions of that story is brutal. To retire in 10 years from zero, you need to save 65% of your take-home pay every year for the entire decade. The average American in April of 2026 saved 2.6%. That's a 25 times gap, and it's not a gap that closes with discipline alone. It's a wall, not a hill. No amount of inspirational content gets a typical earner over it from where they stand. So who can actually do it? That's the question Jim called me about 3 weeks ago. Jim is 42. He's a senior mechanical engineer at a defense contractor outside Cleveland. He earns $140,000 a year, has a wife and a 15-year-old kid, lives in a paid-down 4-bedroom on a quiet street, and just hit $520,000 across his retirement and brokerage accounts. He wants out at 52. He's one of the small group whose numbers might fit. In this video, I'll walk you through whether yours do. We'll cover the actual math behind 10-year retirement, the 3 real tracks people use to pull it off, the 4 tripwires that wreck most attempts around year 4, and the exact moment in your portfolio where compounding starts doing more work than you do. I'll also give you Jim's 3 honest options and where he landed. I'm Tom. This channel is real personal finance for normal people, not the get-rich-quick version. If that's what you want, hit subscribe. We discuss math behind the wall first. The savings rate equation is simpler than the financial industry wants you to believe. There's a piece of analysis floating around the financial independence community for over a decade that captures it in one equation with 3 inputs: your savings rate, your current expenses, and your starting portfolio balance. Feed those 3 numbers in, and you get a number of years to financial independence that's accurate to within about a year. The output looks like this. Save 10% of your take-home, which is the level most financial advisors will recommend, and you're looking at roughly 51 years to reach independence. Bump it to 20% and you're at 37 years. A 30% rate gets you to 28 years. 40% brings it to 22. Half your take-home gets the timeline to 17 years. 2/3, which is 65%, gets you to 10.5 years. To compress further to 7 or 8 years, you have to save 70 to 75%. The reason this works is unintuitive at first and then obvious once you see it. The faster you save, the less you need to retire on. Someone who saves 65% of their take-home is, by definition, living on 35% of it. Their annual expenses are tiny relative to their income, which means the portfolio they need to support those expenses is also relatively small. At the same time, the 65% they're saving is filling that portfolio at extraordinary speed. The 2 effects multiply. The retirement target shrinks while the savings rate explodes. Across about 10 years, the 2 lines meet. This is where the math hits cold water. The personal savings rate in America in April of 2026 was 2.6%, according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis. That's a 4-year low, in a year where inflation at 3.8% is running ahead of wage growth at 3.6%, which means most households are saving less in real terms, even when the percentage looks stable. The 2025 average was about 4.7%. The long-term historical average across the last 67 years is 8.4%. To retire in 10 years from zero, a saver needs to be putting away 65% of their take-home pay. That's roughly 25 times the current national savings rate and about 8 times the long-term historical average. This is what I mean by the 65% wall. The number isn't a stretch goal, it's a structural barrier between the 2.6% normal saver and the 10-year retiree. For a household at median income, the wall is essentially uncrossable from a standing start. If you're earning $70,000 a year, take home roughly $55,000, the 65% rate means living on about $19,000 a year. That's well below the 2026 federal poverty line of $32,150 for a family of 4. Nobody is going to do this, and anyone telling you they can is selling you something other than financial planning. The honest framing of 10-year retirement is therefore not, can I do it, but do my numbers carry me over the wall? For most viewers asking this question, the answer is no. For a specific subset, the answer is yes. And the 3 different ways that subset gets there are what we're walking through next. The 3 tracks over the wall. There are 3 real tracks across the 65% wall. Each one gets there by different math. None of them are mythical. All 3 exist, and I know people who have run each one. Track 1 is the high income saver. A household earning $200,000 to $400,000 a year can save 40 to 50% of their take-home pay while still living a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. A couple bringing home $250,000 after taxes can save $120,000 a year, live on $130,000, and reach about $1.7 million in 10 years at 7% real returns. That portfolio supports about $70,000 of retirement spending for life under the 4% rule. The lifestyle while working doesn't feel like sacrifice. It just doesn't feel like the lifestyle their income could support. The version of them that drove a leased BMW and rented a luxury apartment didn't pursue this path. The version that kept a used Camry and a modest townhouse is the one that hits the 10-year mark. And the version that retired easily slid into a $70,000 lifestyle because they were never spending much above it anyway. Track 2 is the frugal optimizer. A household earning $80,000 to $130,000 can also do it, but the lifestyle requirements are tighter. The numbers come out to saving roughly 50 to 60% of take-home, which means living on $30,000 to $50,000 a year for a family. This usually requires a low cost of living area, a paid-off or modest mortgage, no car payments, and a deliberately stripped-down version of normal American consumption. Cooking at home, no streaming subscription stack, vacations measured in road trips rather than flights. People do this. The financial independence community on Reddit is full of them. The math gets them to roughly $700,000 to $1 million in 10 years, with the higher end of that range reserved for households at the upper income bracket or without kids. What this track requires that the high income version doesn't is intense buy-in from a spouse. One household making these trade-offs alone in a marriage is a divorce in 3 years. Both partners on the plan is a system that works. Track 3 is the catch-up. This is someone who isn't starting from zero. They've been saving for 10 or 15 years already, have between $400,000 and $1 million in retirement accounts, and the question for them is whether the next 10 years closes the remaining gap. The catch-up track relies less on aggressive savings rates and more on the existing balance compounding. Someone with $700,000 at 42, who saves $40,000 a year for 10 years at 7% real, ends with about $1.95 million at 52. That's solidly into retire now territory for any reasonable lifestyle. The catch-up track is where most realistic 10-year retirements actually live, because almost nobody achieves it by saving 65% from zero. There's a specific moment inside the catch-up track that's worth naming, because it's the part that converts the math from feeling slow to feeling unstoppable. I call it the self-fueling point. It's the moment when your portfolio's annual growth at 7% real return starts exceeding your annual contributions. For someone with $700,000 at 42, the self-fueling point arrives in year 1, because 7% of $700,000 is $49,000, more than the $40,000 they're contributing. Every dollar after that is the portfolio doing more of the work than the saver is. By year 5, with both contributions and compounding stacking, the portfolio is generating more than $80,000 a year of growth on its own. The saver's effort becomes a side stream. This is why the catch-up track is so reliable. Once you cross the self-fueling point, you can hit 10-year retirement almost on autopilot, regardless of small life disruptions, because the engine of progress has shifted from you to the portfolio. Jim sits between track 2 and track 3. His starting position at $520,000 is strong, but not quite at the self-fueling point for his expense level. Income is solid at $140,000. He's currently saving about 33% of gross, around $46,500 a year. The shape of his math is good, but not quite where it needs to be to fully fund his current lifestyle at 52. We'll walk through his actual numbers in a moment, but first pause here and tell me in the comments which of the 3 tracks is closest to where you actually sit. High income saver, frugal optimizer, or catch up? I'll read every one and respond where I can. There are 4 tripwires. Every 10-year retirement track has the same 4 tripwires running across it around year 3 to year 5. Almost every plan that fails by tripping one of them. They're not motivation problems. They're structural failures that happen quietly, often without the saver noticing until a year or 2 has been quietly subtracted from the timeline. Tripwire 1 is the quiet drift. This is lifestyle creep, but the version that doesn't announce itself. A household that started saving 50% of their take-home gradually drifts to 45%, then 40%, then 35%, often without consciously deciding to. There's a bigger house in year 4. By year 5, a nicer car. Then eating out 3 nights a week instead of 2 starting in year 6. None of the individual decisions feel like surrender. Together, they push the retirement date out by years. A 5 percentage point drop in your savings rate in year 4 can push the retirement date back by 2 or 3 years, depending on where you started. The version of this that most savers don't see coming is that lifestyle creep almost always happens during the years your portfolio is growing fastest, which makes the upgrades feel earned rather than expensive. The math doesn't agree. Tripwire 2 is the discount. This is the trap of thinking, I'll save more next year when income is higher. Income usually does go up, so do expenses. The catch-up almost never happens because the same psychology that produced the deferral the first time produces it again at the new income level. The math of compounding is unforgiving on this point. Dollars saved at year 2 compound for 8 years before retirement. Dollars saved at year 9 compound for 1 year. The year 2 dollar grows to roughly 1.72 times itself at 7% real. The year 9 dollar grows to 1.07 times. They are not the same dollar, no matter what your spreadsheet labels them. The discount is the silent tax that any delay in contributions extracts from your future portfolio. Tripwire 3 is the single number. Most 10-year plans target something like $80,000 of annual spending and stop there. The version of that $80,000 in year 1 of retirement at 42 is not the version in year 15 at 57. Inflation at 3% doubles your cost of living in 24 years. Inflation at 3.8%, which is the April 2026 reading, halves your purchasing power in 19 years. If you don't plan for the entire arc with inflation built in, the retirement plan that worked at 42 is in trouble at 60. Tripwire 4 is the healthcare cliff. I covered this extensively in the early retirement video for $2 million portfolios, so I won't dwell on it here. The short version is that Medicare doesn't begin until 65, and the ACA marketplace just got more expensive in 2026 because the enhanced premium tax credits expired on December 31st, 2025. For an early retiree, the new 400% FPL cliff at $62,600 of Magi single, $84,600 joint, can cost a household tens of thousands of dollars in lost healthcare subsidies across the bridge from 52 to 65. Anyone planning a 10-year retirement at 52 without modeling that bridge is missing a major line item. The 4 tripwires interact. The quiet drift increases your retirement target. A second hit comes from the discount, which reduces the compounding base. Lay the single number assumption on top, and you're blind to inflation drag. Finish with the healthcare cliff, which creates a 4-figure annual surprise after retirement begins. Together, the 4 tripwires are why most 10-year plans land at 13 or 14 years instead, even when the savers were genuinely committed at the start. Back to Jim. After a couple of calls with the spreadsheet open, here's what his math actually says. His target portfolio at 52, using the 4% rule on his current $72,000 of annual household spending, is $1.8 million. His existing $520,000 grows at 7% real return to roughly $1.02 million over the next 10 years, even without another dollar of contributions. That leaves a gap of about $780,000 that has to come from new savings. At 7% real, filling that gap requires saving about $56,000 a year. He's currently saving $46,500. The honest gap is about $10,000 a year of additional savings. So at his current pace, Jim doesn't quite hit full funding for his current lifestyle at 52. He hits about $1.67 million by 52, which supports $66,600 of inflation-adjusted spending. That's $5,400 short of his current $72,000 lifestyle. He has 3 real options. Option 1 is to find the additional $10,000 a year. That's a real cut, somewhere in the 14% range of his current expenses. The candidates we mapped out were cooking 5 nights a week instead of 3, dropping one of their 2 annual vacations, and trading his wife's 3-year-old SUV in for a 6-year-old version when they replace it next year. Doing all 3 gets him to the $10,000. Doing 1 or 2 of them gets him most of the way. He and his wife couldn't agree on which 2 of the 3 to commit to. Option 2 is to keep the current savings pace and retire at 52 with a $5,400 annual gap. He covers that gap with a small part-time gig or a few months of consulting a year. Many engineers in his field do exactly this for a decade after they leave full-time work. The retirement isn't a hard exit, it's a soft glide. Engineering consulting at his level of experience runs $80 to $130 an hour. So covering $5,400 takes about 50 to 70 billable hours a year, which is 1 client engagement every 2 months or so. Most retired senior engineers can choose their own clients at that volume. Option 3 is to keep the current savings pace and retire at 55 instead of 52. 3 more years of compounding, plus 3 more years of contributions, takes him to about $2.19 million, which supports almost $88,000 of spending. That's well above his current lifestyle, with cushion for inflation, healthcare, and the slight upgrades he and his wife have been talking about. Jim and his wife are still discussing it. The fact that he has 3 honest options at all, where most people his age have 0, is the result of the $520,000 he and his wife built over the last 20 years. The boring path got him to the position where the question of 10-year retirement is at least a real conversation rather than a fantasy. The reason the question, "Can I retire in 10 years?" usually gets a frustrating answer on the internet is that almost nobody is honest about the 65% wall. The math is the same for everyone. The reality is that fewer than 5% of households save anything close to that level, even with strong intent. For most viewers of this video, the honest reframe is to stop asking whether you can retire in 10 years and start asking what specific milestone you can hit in 10 years. Crossing $500,000, paying off the mortgage, building a side income that covers half your bills, maxing tax-advantaged accounts for a full decade, reaching the self-fueling point on your own portfolio. Each of these milestones is real, achievable, and worth more than chasing a 10-year retirement target that won't survive contact with your actual life. For the small percentage of viewers whose income, expenses, and starting balance actually put them on one of the 3 tracks, the plan is mechanical. Save 50 to 65% of take-home depending on which track you're on. Invest the entire amount in low-cost broad market index funds. Don't touch the principal. Keep your lifestyle locked. Watch for the 4 tripwires. Run the numbers honestly every year. The arithmetic does the rest. Jim is leaning toward option 3, the 55 retirement. His wife wants the house repainted and a real trip with their daughter before college. Those things are part of the life he's been building toward. They cost about 3 years of accelerated retirement. Whether that's the right trade-off is his call, not mine. Tell me in the comments which of the 3 tracks you sit on, and which of the 4 tripwires worries you most. I'll read every one. I'll see you in the next video.